You're tuned into the Spot Up Pod, the official podcast of the Spot Up Shot newsletter. I'm your host, Paul Garcia. All right, so for our first topic of this episode, I want to go through the latest news about the Spurs waiving Jamaree Bouyea. So on Sunday morning, Michael Scotto of Hoops Hype reported that the Spurs were going to waive Jamaree Bouyea. Then the team actually waived him a few hours later. We don't know exactly what the Spurs are going to do with that open two-way spot. You know, who's going to get it just quite yet because this news is pretty fresh here. So let me just talk a little bit about what I wrote regarding Bouyea getting waived on Sunday. So really, I mean, this isn't too surprising knowing that he plays a position point guard that is pretty stacked on this roster right now. I mean, the Spurs signed Chris Paul in the offseason, so he's presumably the starting point guard. Then they still have Trey Jones, who's probably going to be the backup point guard. Then third in the depth chart at point guard is probably Blake Wesley. So there's, again, three players in front of him. Plus, they also invited Malachi Flynn to training camp. So Malachi Flynn is on a training camp contract. So who knows, maybe he carves out a spot for himself. So again, there's kind of like, there was basically a point guard battle with five different point guards there. And so it looked very unlikely that the Spurs would, it's not too surprising, should I say, that they ended up, waiving Bouyea. So now we'll see what type of position, if they fill that spot, that open two-way spot, what kind of player do they add there? Will it be another point guard or will it be like a big man, which I'm going to talk about here a little bit later. So where does the Spurs' roster now stand now that Bouyea is off the team? So the Spurs do have 20 players on the roster. They have 15 players on standard NBA contracts. They have two players now on two-way contracts, and then they have those three players on training camp contracts in Riley Minix, Brandon Boston Jr., and Malachi Flynn. So there is one open two-way roster spot. As I also wrote on Sunday, I kind of looked at some early candidates for possible players who might be able to earn that last two-way roster spot. So I have four players here that I kind of mentioned in the article. The first player is rookie Riley Minix. So we did see Minix play on the Spurs' summer league team for a few games. He's more of like plays more so like that power forward kind of stretch power forward slash bigger like small forward kind of role here. So again, if the Spurs end up converting his contract out of training camp into a two-way spot, well then that spot could be his because he'd be going into his rookie season. Another option I wrote about was Nathan Mensah, who reportedly the Spurs were going to sign him at some point in this offseason to make a training camp deal at the minimum. And so the reason why I think Mensah has a pretty good shot here is because we did see this past week that the Spurs were one of the teams interested in Christian Koloko before he ended up signing with the Lakers. So again, the fact that the Spurs had interest in Koloko tells you that maybe they were looking for some more size on the defensive end, and that's exactly what Nathan Mensah would bring to the team, is more depth there at the center position, more of like a traditional big playing mostly focused on defense, and that's kind of what Christian Koloko is going to be bringing to the Lakers. But he ended up signing with the Lakers. So again, I think Mensah might be a good candidate there for that open two-way roster spot. So we'll see if he gets the spot, or another player who should be able to get this spot if the Spurs were to offer it to him would be Brandon Boston Jr. So we know that Boston Jr. is on a training camp contract. And let's just say that the Spurs, are looking to waive him, before the season starts, or maybe they want to convert his contract into a two-way. Because he has only 3 years of NBA experience, he should be eligible to play on a two-way contract. So again, he's also an option that maybe they might want to look at if they're really impressed with him in training camp and the preseason. Maybe if they want to retain Boston and he's okay with signing a two-way, that could be an option for them as well. Regarding Malachi Flynn's contract being converted into a two-way, I don't think it's possible because as I was reading the rules of the two-way eligibility, you have to have, it said fewer than 4 years of experience. So the fact that Flynn's actually already has 4 years of experience in the league, I don't think he would qualify, but, we'll see what happens there. And then the last player is just an unknown player. I'm just calling this free agent X. We don't know who this player is. Maybe the Spurs actually have someone in mind. Maybe by the time you're listening to this, they've already agreed to sign someone to that open two-way roster spot. Maybe it was someone from their summer league team. Maybe it's a player that's just a current free agent that is eligible for a two-way spot. So that answer could come pretty quickly if the Spurs already have someone in mind that they want to sign to that open two-way spot. So again, that was the first topic I wanted to address, just the latest news of Jamaree Bouyea getting waived from the San Antonio Spurs now, and that now opens a two-way roster spot. Let's keep going. So for the next topic, what I did last week was I went on Twitter and I asked followers that follow me on Twitter, just basically send in your Spurs questions because we're getting closer to the training camp starting. We're only 2 weeks out now from Media Day, which is I think expected to be on September 30th. And so, there's not a lot going on. Obviously, I've been writing some pieces about just look at what I call the look ahead series, where I'm looking at different matchups for the Spurs with different teams. But we know that, there hasn't been a lot going on because it's still technically the offseason. So I just wanted to kind of get the thoughts of people that follow me and follow my writing and kind of just see what their thoughts were. And I was interested to see what kind of questions they had as the team goes into training camp here soon in 2 weeks. So what I did was I got about, I think I was like nine responses that I'm going to respond to. Some of it will be in podcast form, the responses, and then the other parts will be in writing over on the Spot Up Shot at my Substack newsletter. So I did take 4 questions that I got, and I want to address these first. And some of these, if you've listened to the first 4 episodes or the first 3 episodes of the Spot Up Pod, you will notice that I've kind of answered these a little bit just in my other topics that I've discussed. But I've been, thank you for sending in the questions, those of you that sent them in on Twitter. And so I'm going to definitely go through some of these questions here. I'm going to go through 4 today. So let's go through question 1. Here we go. This first question is sent by @VTimDuncan. Their question is, Keldon chance at starting again? So basically, does Keldon Johnson have a good chance at starting again? As I discussed in a lineups episode, and also as I've written before in the Spot Up Shot newsletter, I do think that the Spurs' starting lineup is set, but again, things could change. So I think that it's the starting lineup that's been mentioned before by different other media outlets as well, which is Chris Paul at the 1, Devin Vassell at the 2, Harrison Barnes at the 3, Jeremy Sohan at the 4, and then Victor Wembanyama at the 5. So again, right now, I think a lot of people are expecting that's going to be the starting 5, but I do think there's an opening for Keldon Johnson to join the starting lineup. And I think it really comes down to is the question of how much did he improve his outside shooting over the offseason? If he comes in and he's closer to that 40%, a player that teams don't want to leave open early on, I think he has a chance, because that's one of the things, that's one of the areas that he's going to have to be ready to shoot when the ball's not in his hands, because we know that if he's starting, he's going to be alongside Chris Paul, who's kind of handling the ball and running pick and roll with Victor. Victor's definitely going to get his possessions to create for himself and others. Devin Vassell will get pick and roll opportunities. He'll get screen actions, those kind of things. And then basically, if you're like Jeremy Sohan or Harrison Barnes, you're out there mainly trying to. Well, in the case of Barnes, he's out there to try to spread the floor. Sohan's more so kind of hanging around the dunker spot, maybe just moving the ball around, trying to find some cutting avenues to try to get involved in the offense. So again, there's not a lot of possessions for Keldon to kind of have the ball in his hands and try to attack the defense like he likes to do. So I think that if he's made progress with his outside shot, his 3-point shot, then he has a chance. And so let's just say that Keldon's 3-point shot has improved, then that opens the question of, okay, well then who's that 5th starter who's going to go to the bench? And I think that's where the conversation turns to. It's either going to be one of Jeremy Sohan or Harrison Barnes. And, just looking at, there's different arguments for both players. We know that offensively, Barnes is going to offer you a little bit more. He can definitely shoot a lot better from the outside. He's a steady defender out there, consistent out there. He also can attack you as a second or third playmaking option kind of situation, mainly on drives, as I've discussed here on the Spot Up Pod. Whereas Sohan, we know that offensively, he's not going to give you as much on the team, but he's going to give you a lot more defensively, where he's a versatile defender, can guard different positions, switch on different possessions and things like that. So I think that's where there's a give and take there of whether, the Spurs would want to go with either Barnes for more outside shooting or Sohan for more defensive, making more of a defensive impact. So I think that's where that conversation would come down to. But I think overall, I'm still sticking with the option of Keldon's coming off the bench, just because for him, for his playmaking on offense, it just gives him a better chance to be that 6th man, that one of those go-to players off the bench. He would get more opportunity to attack and try to get to the free throw line, especially if his shot's not quite as developed as as maybe the Spurs are hoping going into this next season. So again, I think there is a chance for him to start, yes, but just giving my opinion of where I think the best opportunity for him to thrive at is probably still coming off the bench. So again, we'll kind of see what happens in training camp and preseason. But thank you again for sending in that question. The second question comes from @GanjiWorld. They ask, do you think Blake Wesley makes the roster? Okay, so this is an interesting question. I'm going to say yes. I do think Blake Wesley makes the roster still. Even though he's on a guaranteed contract for a few more years here. And let me just give you my reasons why I do think that he's in a safe zone where he's okay to still stay on the Spurs' roster. He's not like in a Lucas Samanic or Olivia Jean Charles situation from the past few years ago. So for one, he's on a guaranteed contract, like I mentioned, and he's going to make $2.6 million this season. So even if the Spurs waived him, there's no reason to waive him. They still have to pay that salary. So again, there's no like financial benefit to waiving him now. They're still going to be on the hook for his salary. Then the interesting date to watch is Halloween night, October 31st. Why is that an interesting day? Because that is when the Spurs, that's their final day to exercise his team option for next season, when his contract goes up to $4.7 million. Next season. So again, if they exercise that team option, then he will be on the roster or getting paid to be on the roster next season at $4.7 million. If they don't, well, then this will be his final season, and then he'd be going into free agency next summer earlier than anticipated. But again, I think that it's just a better to hold on to Wesley, even if he's not going to maybe crack the rotation and be one of the top 10 players on the team. Because you still have those he's still a young player, and you can still look at trade opportunities either this season or if you exercise his team option, then even next season. So again, you want to try to get value for him if you are going to move on from him and not have him part of your future plans. You just don't want to waive him outright. And I think that it wouldn't be a good decision to just waive him outright because he's shown some upside, at least defensively. He's shown that he can be a really good on-ball defender, really energetic out there, setting the tone early on when he gets into the game. And so I think that there's still opportunity, whether it's with the Spurs for him or whether it's looking for trades down the road with him for maybe another team who wants to take a gamble on a young player. I think that he's just shown more upside than maybe players that the Spurs have waived in the past on guarantee deals, such as Lucas Samanic a few years ago and Livio Jean-Charles. Also, I mean, regarding his opportunity, I kind of understand where you're coming from with this question. It's because when you look at the rotation, it's really tough for Blake to get minutes. We don't think he's going to pass up Chris Paul in the starting lineup. We don't think he's going to pass up Trey Jones off the bench. So then it's that question of, does he carve out a role for himself amongst those second unit players, or does he just kind of wait until there's certain games when maybe Paul or Trey Jones is out for a game, a player from the rotation's out due to injury, and we do notice that at 39 years old, Chris Paul is most likely going to miss some games. I looked at his data, and over the last 3 years, he's only played 65 or fewer games in each of the last 3 seasons. So again, he's bound at 39 years old to miss a few games here or there, or even the Spurs just give him a rest night or two. So there's going to be opportunity for Blake to play. I think whether he's being as productive as he can when he gets into the games and making an impression on Pop, or like I said, whenever a player rests in the guard wing rotation, there could be minutes for him. So again, I think overall it is best for the Spurs to hold on to Blake Wesley and not waive him outright. I think even if they don't have him and their plans for the future, I think it's still a good decision to try to at least seek out trades, whether it's for this season or next season. Kind of do those two. So our third question comes from @ReverseDVD. Their question is, with Wemby, Sohan, Barnes, Vassell, and Chris Paul being the projected starting 5, what should be the next 5 coming off the bench to back them up? So who is the second unit? Who are the next 5 players? So this is also a question I've kind of addressed in prior episodes, but I'll go through it again here. So I think that the bench unit, there's at least 4 players I think are locked on the bench, off the bench. It's Trey Jones as the backup point guard, Stephon Castle as the backup shooting guard, Keldon Johnson as the backup power forward, or wing, smaller wing player. And then also Zach Collins as the backup center to Wemby. So again, I think those 4 players, their roles are set, ready to go as off the second unit. The player though, who I currently have penciled in there in that next spot, that small forward position, backup small forward, is Julian Champagnie. But again, I don't think he's a lock. I think because we saw that he was a starter last season, he's a knockdown shooter that Pop can rely on for offense, for spacing. And then defensively, he's a stable defender out there. I think he has the advantage currently over Malachi Branham and Blake Wesley. So again, I think that there's going to be a battle going on in training camp in the preseason to see who gets that 10th spot there off the bench. And I think that comes down to, again, Champagnie, Malachi Branham, or Blake Wesley. Or I think there's also a chance that Pop split some of those minutes, kind of like what he did with Doug McDermott and Jetty Osman last season, where some games McDermott would start the first half, then the second half we saw more Jetty Osman out there. So he could do something like that where he splits the minutes in that 10th spot between, Champagnie for a quarter, and then Branham for maybe another quarter, or Wesley and Champagnie, something like that. I think that there's those 2 options. So again, right now I think that 4 of those backup players are ready to go, that they're going to be in the second unit. It comes down to that 5th spot of who's going to play those extra minutes, whether it's Champagnie, Branham, or Wesley. And again, currently, before preseason and training camp even start, I do have a Champagnie there in that role. All right, and now for the final question. It comes from @Sushanti Rao. Sushanti Rao, hopefully I said that right. Okay, so their question is, what are the Spurs shooting for this season? Respect but lottery, play-in, outright playoff team. And I want to give you credit there because I kind of like how you put different categories there. So again, those are their categories there. So respect but lottery, play-in, or outright playoff team. So I'm going to say the Spurs will. I think they're shooting. Obviously, they're going to say they're shooting for the playoffs. I think every team, unless you're in like the bottom 3 or saying looking at the lottery, other teams they're always going to be shooting for the playoffs. So they're probably going to say they're shooting for the playoffs. But I think more realistically, they're going to be in that respect but lottery range or that play-in range, kind of fighting in those two areas. So, when we look at their over-under, according to Vegas, they are projected to win 36, or their over-under is 36.5 wins, which is much higher than the 22 last season. So we do see that with the moves of adding Stephon Castle, adding Chris Paul, adding Harrison Barnes, this should be a better team, at least on paper right now, coming into this next season. The problem, though, is that they play in the Western Conference, and that is a very tough conference. Really, there's only two teams right now on paper that I say the Spurs are immediately better than, and that's Portland, who's expected to finish 15th out west, and Utah, who's expected to finish 14th out west. And so when we just look at the over-unders of where the Spurs are projected to finish, they're actually projected to finish 13th out west. And I think that it comes down to these few teams that the Spurs are going to have to battle with. They have to battle with the Clippers, who I think could take a fall this year. If Kawhi has some different injuries he's dealing with, they mainly have Harden as one of their key playmakers, and like Norman Powell. They have Zubac. Again, the fact that they lost Paul George, the Clippers could be one of those teams that maybe the Spurs try to pass in the standings. And also the Rockets. The Rockets had a good season. They were developing last year. They showed strides last year, and so that's another team that the Spurs are battling with to try to pass up to try to get into that play-in range. And then let's just say that the Spurs do finish with better records than both the Rockets and the Clippers. Well, then guess what? Now they're knocking on the door of 10th, and projected to finish 10th right now is the Los Angeles Lakers, who have most of their team back from last season. Obviously, they got eliminated pretty early in the playoffs, but they're still, a good core team with Anthony Davis, LeBron James, and some of the other players they have on their roster. And then also the Warriors, made some addition. I know they lost Klay Thompson, but they still have the majority. They have a lot of their veteran players still on the team, like Draymond, Stephen Curry, Kevon Looney. Then they've added a lot of shooting and different playmaking on their team, like Kyle Anderson. They added Buddy Hield, amongst a few names. DeAnthony Melton was also added to the Warriors. So again, I think Golden State's still going to be a pretty good team there. So again, if you're the Spurs, I think that they're going to be in that mix there of kind of battling with the Clippers, the Rockets, the Lakers, and the Warriors to see which of those teams ends up going into the play-in scenario. And if they don't, well, then I think that those teams finish kind of right outside the bubble. So that's kind of where I think the Spurs are right now, just based on paper. And then one of the teams that kind of threw a wrench here that should be better this year, that really wasn't in this conversation last year, is Memphis. Memphis, with the healthy John Morant, they should be ready to go. They added Zach Edey via the draft. So Memphis, if they're good again, like they were 2 or 3 years ago, when they were the top teams in the West, then right now they're projected to be the 5th seed out west. So again, you're throwing one of the bad teams from last year now into the upper. The upper echelon mix there of teams. And so that's kind of where I do see the Spurs. I think that they are battling with the Clippers, Rockets, Lakers, and Warriors to try to get one of those play-in spots. And that's kind of like who do they pass up? That's the thing, is they got to pass up one of these teams. And again, out of those 4 teams I named, I think the Clippers are the most likely one that they have a chance of passing up. I think it's going to be tough for them, though, to pass up the Rockets and the Lakers and the Warriors. So again, thank you for sending in that question. And again, I liked how you put the different tiers there. But I do think the Spurs will be more respectable this year, probably end up in the lottery, or if not, at best, I think they do get into one of those play-in seats, like the 9 or 10 seeds. So again, that was just that kind of wraps up this episode, where I kind of wanted to go through the latest news of Jamaree Bouyea getting waived, and then I also wanted to go through the 4 different questions that some of you all sent in through Twitter that follow me on Twitter. I will also have some other questions saved up, so I'll be going through some of those questions in a future episode of the Spotted Pod, and we will continue to see if the Spurs make some moves now with training camp officially coming about 2 weeks away. So it's getting closer to the season starting. Thank you for taking the time to listen to this episode of the Spotted Pod. If you like what you heard, please subscribe and leave us a rating on your favorite podcast apps and our YouTube channel. The Spotted Pod is recorded and produced by Paul Garcia. The music for this episode was written by Vincent Garcia and Paul Garcia. Thank you for listening, and have a great day.